Dear friends in Jesus Christ, there was a man who was driving down from the freeway in his brand new Corvette with the top down, going 80 miles an hour when he saw flashing red lights from a state trooper in his rear view mirror. Without thinking about it, he floated, took off to 100 miles an hour. He heard the siren behind him. He finally pulled over and said, "Officer, I'm so sorry. I do not know what I was thinking." The state trooper said, "Listen, it is Friday, 4 o'clock. My shift is over in 30 minutes. If you tell me a reason why you are speeding that I never heard before, then I let you go." The man thought about it and said, "Officer, years ago, my wife ran off with a state trooper, and I thought you were bringing her back." The officer said, "Have a great weekend." Dear friends in Jesus Christ, whenever we find something or someone dragging us down, our instinct is do something that will counteract that downward movement, whether it is listening to good music or going for a walk or playing any sports or visiting an exhibition of good art or meeting a friend. When we are trying to deal with a difficult situation, whether at a national level or more a personal level, not only it is important to do something that gives us life, but the way we talk about that situation can also be very significant. We can talk about the situation in a way that makes it more difficult to deal with, or we can talk about in a way that helps us to manage the situation and move through it. We can use language that constantly holds before us a scenario of doom and gloom, or we can use language that allows us to imagine a better future. In struggling with the experience of loss and failure, it is important that we find a language of hope, a language which recognizes that every situation, no matter how unpromising, contains within the seed of new life. That kind of discourse, the language of hope, is ultimately rooted in a faith perspective on life. It comes from the conviction that if God can bring something good out of the mess that was Calvary, then God can bring something worthwhile out of every unsatisfactory situation. As Paul says in his letter to the Romans, we know that all things work together for good for those who love God. How we speak not only reflects reality, but helps to shape it well, and a language of hope can shape even the darkest situation for the better. It is the second Sunday of Advent, and the language of Advent is very much the language of hope. In today's second reading, Paul speaks about hope. He says that everything that was written long ago in the scriptures was meant to teach us something about hope. Paul declares there that the scripture gives us hope by putting before us examples of how people who did not give up were helped by God. In other words, people who remained hopeful in the midst of difficult situations, who did not give up, discovered that God came to their help. The message of is that the message is that our struggle to remain hopeful open us up to God's helping presence. God help us when we refuse to give up. Our hopeful striving creates an opening for God to act creatively in our lives. Paul is right when he says that there are many examples in the scripture that demonstrate that truth. We can point to examples in the gospel. The blind man named Bartimaeus, who sat by the roadside begging, did not give up in his efforts to reach Jesus, whom he recognized as the source of light, so he craved. Even when the crowds told him to be quiet, he remained hopeful that the Lord could work creatively in his darkness, because he did not give up, because he kept on hoping in spite of so many reasons to become discouraged. He was helped by God. He and many other characters in the scriptures can be an inspiration to us in these difficult times. The message of Paul in the second reading is expressed in more imaginative language in today's first reading from the prophet Isaiah, one of the great prophets of hope in the scriptures. The opening of the reading speaks of a shoot springing from the stalk of or stump of Jesse and a branch thrusting from its roots. Jesse was the father of David. In Isaiah's time, the dynasty of David had as good as disappeared. It was like stump of a tree that had been cut down. Yet Isaiah had a vision to see that a shoot could spring from that stump, a branch from the root of that stump. Where most people saw a stump with no future, Isaiah saw that stump as the womb from which would emerge a king like no previous king from the line of David. This king would finally embody God's just rule. As Christians, we recognize Jesus as that king. Isaiah had a hopeful vision for a dispirited people, a vision rooted in his conviction that God's good purpose, God's dream for our lives had an enduring quality regardless of the mess we might made in the past. We all need that vision in these times, the vision that sees a future full of hope in what seems as good as dead. If we have such hope and keep it alive, God will certainly come to our help. In the Gospel, John the Baptist uses an even more striking image of hope than Isaiah when he says, God can raise children for Abraham from these stones. Whatever about new growth from a tree stump, a children from stones does defy the imagination. That is what hope does. It defies the imagination, it defies the arts, because it puts no limits on what God can do.